So to preference this story, I was about 15 or 16 years old at the time. It was my best friend's birthday, and she had invited about 6 of us over to play a few games, such as Mario Party, Mario Kart, Guitar Hero, etc., and stay the night in celebration of her big 16th. So at this get-together, there was 5 girls, including me, and 1 boy. After a while, my best friend asked if we would like to go to the playground, which was about a 10-minute walk away from our house. Of course, being stupid teens, we agreed, not thinking of how it might be dangerous since the majority of us were young girls and it was currently 10 p.m. Anyways, we walked down to this park and continued playing Grounders when we arrived, which, if you don't know, is a game commonly played in elementary schools. The rules are, one person is it. The person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek the other players as they hide on playground equipment in order to tag them. But there's a catch. If someone gets off the equipment and the person who's it calls Grounders while they're on the ground, then they are tagged. Yeah, I know, a pretty childish game, but fun. After a few rounds, we got bored and decided to huddle around in a circle in the center of the playground equipment. We were just talking, joking around, when suddenly I heard what I thought to be something like rocks hitting the chain link fence that resided on back of the playground. I hushed the group. I looked over at my best friend, asking if she heard that. Everyone looked at me like I had 10 heads. She asked what I meant, and when I told her, it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the fence behind us. She responded with the classical, "Ooh, it's a murder coming to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipping her off. She knows I get paranoid sometimes, but I have a very good intuition and something just felt off. A few minutes later, after some more rocks were thrown at the fence, and I obsessively stared down the area behind the fence, which was all woods beside the houses on the left and the right of the playground, in paranoia, I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of the trees. At first, I thought maybe it was just a headlight of a car that was coming down the street that connected to the street of the park, since you can vaguely see the headlights of oncoming traffic through them. But I soon realized there was only one light, and it was bouncing up and down like it was being held by someone who was walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me, as we all snapped our heads over in the direction. Coming up alongside the nearby house on the left side of the park was a man who wore a hat, some white baggy and dirty sweatpants, and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight. Not the one on your phone, but an actual flashlight. He was too far away to guess his age, even when he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on. But we all collectively agreed it was strange, since he seemed, I guess from his clothes, to be at least mid-20s, and just came out of the woods by himself to sit and stare at a load of kids. After a brief discussion, we agreed that maybe he was waiting for a ride, or was just resting for a moment. So we tried to brush the fact he was sitting and so intensely staring at us. However, we started to take note that after a few minutes of us resuming our very competitive game of Grounders, that this stranger was slowly inching his way closer to our group. He went from sitting on one of the swings furthest away, to the next swing a bit closer to the equipment we were on, to the next, until he was just about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time, he just sat there, watching. At this point, all of us have noticed a strange man attempting to get closer to us, and in an attempt to remove ourselves from a potentially dangerous situation, we made a group decision to leave. Getting up, we all piled off the playground equipment, and in pairs of 2, we walked down the stairs on the side furthest away from the creepy man. As we attempted to casually walk away, I kept my eyes glued to his figure, and as we neared the end of the street, he got up. Slowly at first, the man started to trail behind us, keeping his distance. I decided to keep my mouth shut at the time because we were about to make a turn. I thought that if he continues to follow us instead of going the other way, I'd bring it up to the others. And wouldn't you know it, the creep stays hot on our heels, not only following which turn we took, but he also started sprinting towards us screaming, I will kill you! At this point, the whole group burst out into a sprint. The adrenaline I felt made me run so fast I was ahead of everyone else. Everyone was ushering each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were behind me. That was until I heard my best friend struggling to run. She has pretty bad asthma. I instantly felt horrible for running off on her. So I ran back by her side, grabbing her hand, and quite literally dragging her along, repeating things like, "Deep breaths, you got this. Come on, we have to go now." This whole time, the man was still running and screaming behind us and was catching up quickly. At this point, both me and another girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand and running at the pace she could keep. Luckily, this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, if even that much. And as we all piled in through the garage door, I turned to see this delusional man start running up her driveway. He got about halfway up until our big fluffy savior ran to the open door. My friend's 100-pound, fully grown German Shepherd, she lurched at the man, barking as we gripped her collar, an attempt to keep her from running completely after the man. Luckily, her sudden and loud appearance caused the man to freeze in fear, before running away down the dark lamp-lit street. We were terrified for the rest of the night, and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake. But most comforting was our big fluffy hero, just in case the creep decided to come back. So to the crazy creep who enjoys watching kids at the park and then chasing them home, let's not meet again. Years ago, man, I am old, but let's say mid-1990s, I worked as a woodland firefighter while in the Army Reserves. I worked as a spotter. Basically, I was stationed in a giant fire tower in the middle of a national park. My job was just as it sounds. I would use binoculars and look out for fire, smoke, and other telltale signs of fire. My nearest Con Padre was 5 miles or so from me. My days consisted of working my shift, taking long walks around the fire tower, being on the lookout for anyone who might be having illegal fires, looking up for wildlife, and staying afoot of bears and wolves. The ways our shifts worked back then was 1 week on and 1 week off. So we slept in the towers, cooked our food, etc. There were nearby toilets and showers for us. One day, I came across an illegal bear trap. I had several ranger friends and I safely set off the trap and picked it up to take to the ranger station on one of my treks up for food in my Jeep. Poaching is illegal in the park and carried out a big fine, even back then, and some jail time, but it did not stop the poachers from trying. I heard rifle shots and headed back for my fire tower. We did have a rifle in the tower to be used in case of emergencies. Just a few months back, a fellow spotter had been mauled to death by a grizzly, so each tower had been outfitted with a rifle. I looked with my binoculars, but did not see anything out of the ordinary. I radioed my coworker Ben, an older guy, in the adjacent tower. He hadn't heard anything today, but he had come across a few traps himself. That night, after dinner of frank and beans and toast, I was writing to my future wife when I heard the rumbling of a truck. Thinking it may be Ben, occasionally he made the trek over. We would crack open a soda and chew the fat for a bit. Instead, I saw 4 men with rifles getting out of the truck. One looked around and leaned up against the truck, while the other 3 grabbed traps and began to set them up. I grabbed the rifle and my lantern and headed down the stairs. I was only 21, a farmer's son from a rural Virginia farming town, and even with 1 deployment behind me, I was naive. I should have called it into the Rangers, but instead I thought I could talk some sense into the 4 dangerous men. I barely got a, "Hey, what are you doing?" out of my mouth before I was roughly shoved by rough hands. My lantern fell and I heard it crack. The rifle was kicked away from me and I felt the breath leave my chest when I was violently kicked in the stomach. I barely had caught my breath when I was grabbed by 2 of the men and was shoved forward into the woods. It seemed like we walked for miles, but in reality it was probably only a mile. However, I noticed that there were no sounds. In the forest, it is rarely silent. There's always a bunch of sounds, even at night. Owls, the wolves, crickets. But on this night, nothing. Suddenly, I was shoved onto my knees and I felt hot tears well up. I thought of my parents, my little sister and brother, and my fiancé, who were back home in Virginia. I heard the rack of a gun and I shut my eyes and prayed. Suddenly, the night erupted. However, it was the sounds of sirens. Those of the forest rangers, and behind them, in his pickup, Ben, who had tried to radio me that he had heard a car's engine and came to my tower when I didn't reply. The poachers were arrested. Ben drove me back to the tower. I was still shaking. He didn't lay into me for not following procedure. He just said, "That was close, kid." I ended up leaving the job months later to take a job closer to home, but I never ran into any more poachers during the rest of my time. I kept in contact with Ben for a while, sent him a wedding invite, and then a photo of my firstborn son in 1997. However, as time usually does, we lost track of one another, and a few years back I googled him. He would have been 75 or so, and I discovered he had passed away a few years back. Don't know whatever came of those poachers, but I know I never want to meet them again.
I'll start off by explaining the area so you can get a good picture of where this occurred. We lived in a small neighborhood. All of the surrounding streets dead end into a half-circle park. Behind the park are some woods and a railroad track. When we were younger, we all played in the front part of the woods. We never ventured too far back. This was our play area for years. Never had an issue or scare. This area was a pretty well-lit wooded area. Anyhow, one day, my brother Jimmy, my best friend Sarah, and my brother's friend Ian were all building a dam in the middle of a small creek that ran through the park and the woods. The boys decided they were going to head back to Ian's house for some snacks. Sarah and I said we would stay and finish our camp area. As we are moving rocks around, I get a very odd feeling come over me. A strange feeling that we are being watched. I immediately think it's the boys trying to scare us and just continue with what we are doing. Sarah and I load up some big rocks and head back to the creek and put them down at the dam. I get that feeling again, and as I stand up, I see something straight in front of me, about 30 feet away. I can't clearly make out what it is yet, because it is behind a bush, but I do see that it is a pattern of red and blue. I know that's nothing the boys had on, so at this point I am focusing, trying to figure out what it is. As I am scanning up the bush, I start to realize it's a clown. I kid you not, my head started pounding immediately. The clown and my eyes lock. He's wearing a blue-red hat with a reverse pattern, red-blue jumpsuit. I grab Sarah's shirt and immediately pull her upright, and she notices the man right away. He is smiling with a full face of makeup and has a huge knife. We both say nothing and start running as fast as our legs can take us. He begins to follow. We can hear twigs snapping and the ground crunching. But we are booking it. We run through the front of the woods, through the side of the park, and up to our dead-end street. Ian and Jimmy are 2 houses up from the end and see us running and are screaming what is going on. We are still running, screaming for our lives, and finally make it to the middle of the street where Sarah's dad, Danny, is now running out the front door because he hears us screaming. We meet Danny right at the beginning of the neighbor's house, and we are trying to explain what we've seen, and he says, "Girls, stop it now. This is ridiculous. What are you talking about?" We try to catch our breath. By this time, Jimmy and Ian have caught up to us. We are crying and pointing and telling Danny again that we've seen a clown with a knife. Jimmy and Ian are laughing and Danny is asking if they played a prank on us. About this time, an old yellow Pinto type of car comes from the dead-end street at the park and pulls up next to the sidewalk of the yard we are in. Sure enough, plain as day, it's the clown. No hat this time, but the knife in hand and telling us to come here. Danny starts shoving us all towards the house, and he himself is scared and running now. The car drives off down the street. We get inside, and Danny calls the police. We had to give statements, and the police patrolled the neighborhood and the park for a few weeks. We were never allowed to go in the park again, and a few months after that the city started to clear out the woods, cut down many trees, and made a walking area so that you could see all the way through to the train tracks. My friends and I used to talk about this many times up until her death. No one would believe us had they not seen it as well. It was just so scary. I think they only got to see him because whoever it was had to go down the road to the end of the street to leave the neighborhood. Either way, this man was not afraid of us, nor the small group of people that gathered from our screaming. He very bravely stopped right in front of us as our father tried to comfort us and calm us down, all while flashing his knife. We are very lucky to be alive, I feel. Had it just been one of us left in the woods, which sometimes occurred, I don't think there would have been a group of 4 of us any longer. Sarah's dad stopped drinking that day. We all have a fear of clowns.